WordPress Accessibility Day 2024. Maintaining your site's accessibility well after launch, with speaker Jeanette Stair, Accessibility Lead and Project Director, Government Services, at Forum 1. This presentation was recorded October 2024.
Welcome to WordPress Accessibility Day 2024. My name is Sherose Badruddin, and I'm from the University of North Carolina. I'm a digital accessibility consultant. Thank you for joining us for our last session. This is hosted by Jeanette Stair. The session is titled Maintaining Your Site's Accessibility Well After Launch. Jeanette is an accessibility lead and project director for Government Services, Forum 1. Since 2009, Jeanette has learned about and practiced making digital products accessible for federal, state, and local government clients, as well as large and small non-government organizations. She's passionate about helping everyone and helping everyone access the information and services they need. Audience, feel free to add your questions to the Zoom Q&A section, and we'll answer them at the end of the session. You can use the chat to connect with other attendees. Jeanette, take it away.
Thanks so much. And it's such an honor to be presenting at this conference. There have been so many good presentations already, and especially to close out the conference today. So thanks to the organizers for that. And I feel like this is a good topic for the end of this conference, right? We've been talking about websites, making them accessible. And now I want to talk about how to keep that up, right? So that was a great introduction. Ooh, hold on one second. So a lot of this we went over already, although I will add that I recently got my CPAC certification from the International Association of Accessibility Professionals, and also that this presentation is built on more than just my experience. So this is also the experience of my colleagues at Forum 1, and we do a lot of website work, a lot of WordPress, a lot of Drupal, and other platforms for different kinds of clients. So I've worked a lot with the federal government, but also getting into non-government organizations, federal, state, and local in the US, though, mostly. So we'll go from there. That's kind of my context. That's my background that I'll be sharing and moving from. So this talk is based on that idea that you've designed a website, you've built a website, maybe something a little larger, something that has multiple people contributing to content, whether or not they're actually entering the content into WordPress or not, but that kind of idea, and that website has been, designed, built recently with accessibility in mind. So you're starting from a good place, you've done checks, and you want to keep that up. But there can be some challenges to doing that. So we'll talk about a few things in this presentation. One is common challenges for content contributors. Then we'll go into effective accessibility governance planning, also monitoring and audit strategies, and long-term considerations. I'm just going to switch up my slides real quick. One moment. And we should be back on track. Thanks. So one of the common challenges with maintaining content after launch is falling into old habits. So especially if you have a larger group of people who are contributing to content, and if they don't have a strong background in accessibility, if this is a newer thing for them and they're used to maintaining maybe a previous version of the website that was less geared towards accessibility, didn't have those features, has a new design with the new website. So especially when people are working under time constraints. And I feel like most people have time constraints, right? It's just so easy to slip back into old habits, what you're comfortable with, what you're used to. So then moving forward, how you can address this, or how an organization can address this, is by creating new habits. This is the best thing that can be done. So part of it is making sure people are trained, that they have that information about how to write for web, what the accessibility considerations are with writing content, and then practicing it over and over, making it automatic. Then it's not something extra. It's not something that people have to think about. It just is something that when you do the content, when you create it, when you're writing it, you just do it with those best practices, because it's automatic. So that needs some support, that needs that training up front, that needs making sure there's reminders and checks on that to make sure it's happening. It becomes a habit, and then it's just in the flow. That's the goal. Other challenges. So design system not working. So this assumes that you have a design system, which is always something that is good for a website, making sure you have consistency across the website, you have standard heading styles, you have standard components that can be reused throughout the website. But something that happens is that it might not be complete. Parts of it might not work, and you have to expect this up front. So examples of what this looks like, or red flags that this might be the issue. If content editors don't use headings correctly, see this a lot. They choose the one that they like visually. Maybe that hierarchy isn't clear enough with the headings, or H4 is more exciting than H3, so people want to use it more. That's a sign that that design system is not really working and maybe needs some tweaks. Another example of this is using images of text. Maybe there's no component available that combines text and images in the way people need. So then, like, that might be something that's missing from the design system that needs to be added to make sure that we're using best practices. Then something that comes up frequently too is too few or maybe too many ways to emphasize information. This can start with a content issue of making sure that the content has a clear goal and a clear message. Sometimes people get a little excited about wanting to highlight everything on a page, and then so nothing really stands out. So making sure that content is structured in a way that has a clear message and goal, but then making sure that the design system also supports that there are appropriate ways that are then marked up correctly for accessibility for people to highlight information. And so they're not using components in the wrong way. For example, using a pull quote just to make something look good, even if it's not a quote. So that wouldn't be ideal. So ways to address this, plan for that. Plan to review and update the design system. Plan that it's not a static thing and it will need maintenance. It'll need growth over time. Another way, or other strategies involved in making sure that there's documentation. This is something that can be hard to get in to like a website design and build project, but can be added to along the way as you have a website. And having examples and guidelines for content editors on how different components should be used, how to get across the messages they want, that can be really helpful. And sometimes including the rationale on why these components should be used in this way, can be helpful in helping people understand and remember why they need to use one component over another, why they shouldn't be using a component for something that it's not intended for. Another common challenge, content approval. So especially with my background working with larger government organizations, but this can come up in any kind of organization, depending on how formal it is. So there can be this issue where content is created in a Microsoft Word document. It's emailed between multiple people, and there's an approval process. So that wording, that specific wording, is approved by 3 people, one of which is the top leader of the organization. So it cannot be changed. However, trying to get it on the web, maybe it's not following those accessibility guidelines. It's not following best practices for web. And there's that tension of how much can we change it before it needs to go through an approval process again. So really the tactic for that would be to work accessibility into the approval process. And often, usually, it's a legal requirement. So it really should be part of that approval process. So this might also be about education for the organization on what those requirements are. So those are some common challenges and things that pop up or might contribute to a website starting off as highly accessible, but then, starting to morph and change into something that's less accessible just based on content additions or changes. Next, we'll talk a bit about effective accessibility governance planning. So governance planning, what we're talking about here is that organizational structures that support the process of updating and making sure that the website is accessible long term. So someone needs to own this process. If someone's not clearly assigned or a team is not assigned to this, then it's just Wild West. It's chaos. It might happen based on individuals, but if people switch out or there's different people doing it, won't be consistent. So somebody should own that. There should be a monitoring and audit strategy. I think a lot of us here know that, this is what this talk is about. It's not over. There's no done. There's this continuous need to make sure things are continuing to be accessible. So that requires monitoring and auditing, not just one audit, and then you're done, but a strategy. There should be a review and update process. So a lot of teams annually works. Maybe it needs to be quarterly. Maybe it can only be every other year, but figure out what that is for this site and for the team that manages it. The other thing is standards change. So processes need to change too. Technology changes. We know this. We've seen WCAG 2.0, 2.1, 2.2. We're getting ready for WCAG 3. And that's really exciting. So what worked 5 years ago, 10 years ago, doesn't work today. So that governance needs to acknowledge that and plan for that proactively. And then this should also include training and knowledge sharing practices, because it's easy to forget things if you don't use them every day. But if that comes up, you want to be prepared for that. You'll have new people joining organizations, and they need to know what everybody else knows. Sometimes you tackle a tricky issue that nobody at the organization has had to deal with before. So you need a way to ask those questions to get feedback on what is the best way to do things. Other things involved in accessibility, governance, planning, standard operating procedures. So this is a very formal term, but just making sure that you know how you're doing things for testing updates to the website. So how do you make sure features or bug fixes maintain your accessibility standard? So if you're adding things into it, are you testing those for accessibility as well as the intended functionality, and your regression testing to make sure you haven't broken anything else on the website? And consider who's responsible for ensuring accessibility. So you have the code, you have the content, you have the design, you have third-party tools. So who's responsible in each of those areas where things might be able to go wrong to make sure that they're not. And then if you have had issues and you've fixed them, how are you verifying that they're fixed? Who's doing the review to make sure that that change actually changed what it intended to? So those are some aspects of governance planning for accessibility. Next, we'll talk about some monitoring and audit strategies. So continuous monitoring, it's different how you might approach this for a small site versus a large site. When I talk about a small site, I mean like 10 pages, 12 pages, maybe 20 pages on the site. But once you start talking about hundreds of pages, thousands of pages, it's a different story. So very small sites, you might be able to do continuous monitoring with manual review. You might have dedicated individuals, they might use automated tools, but they can do that page by page. For larger sites, you might need a tool that scans through the site. So there are various tools out there, some of which include Site Improve, DQ has some tools, Level Access has a platform for this. So they'll typically do a scan through a site, crawl through every page. They'll do automated checks. And this can take different amounts of times, like that scan might take days or a week to do. But as we know, if we've been at some sessions here, automated checks are not enough. So these platforms typically also will flag things that need to be manually checked. But it's important to understand the limitations of these automated platforms for monitoring. Some of these tools have other features such as SEO, plain language, analytics. Some of them are very specific to accessibility. But the other thing is, it's not just something you can set and forget. Somebody needs to look at the results. Somebody needs to do the manual work. So even if you're going to pay for a platform like this, it's not just on its own. You also have to manage it. So then audits are important too. So you might have this platform that does regular scans weekly, monthly, across the whole site, but again, it's limited. So, so regular audits, say annually, you would want to plan for. So there are different methods. It could be integrated with that continuous monitoring tool. You could have manual reviews from either internally, or you could partner with another organization to do that. Usability testing with assistive technologies users is really important. So if you can plan for that, partner with people who can do that, or with an organization who has access to people who include that group, then that's going to be extremely valuable, because you're not just getting accessibility testing, you're getting usability testing. And we know those are very closely related. Sample. So these manual tests, especially if you're on a large site, hundreds, thousands of pages, you're not going to be able to manually check every single page. So you'll want to pick a sample. And W3C has some information about how to select a sample. But it's good to select pages that cover all your different page templates or post types. For example, all your components. Sometimes it's helpful to set up a everything bagel page or a kitchen sink page, a page that has examples of all your different components. Sometimes that can be part of your design documentation. So you have examples of components with how they should be used and the guidelines around it. And then you use that page as your test page to make sure that all those components are accessible and usable. And your sample should also include complete processes. So maybe your site, you're asking for donations. You want to make sure that that complete process is accessible to all your users. And it might involve multiple pages or multiple steps. I keep mentioning annual as an example frequency. But one thing to think about when you're deciding on a frequency for audits is making sure you have time to fix what you found in one audit before you go on to the next one. Again, we know that resources are constrained. There are many things that go into websites, security updates, content updates. So just making sure that, like, if you want to do it more often, if you want to do it quarterly, is that the right frequency for you? Are you able to address items before the next audit? Because if you haven't fixed anything, then the audit's going to show you things you already know. And then investment. So you need to plan for resources to address the items found in audit. So you have to invest in the audit itself, but also addressing those fixes. Who's going to do that? What kind of budget is there for that? Prioritizing accessibility bugs. So I have a section here. It's one example of a rating system that you can use for accessibility bugs. It's not the only factor for prioritization. So we'll talk a little bit about that too. And it's not the only way. So this is meant to be more inspirational. You can use this. You can download my slides and use this rating as is. I know there was a webinar recently with another rating system. So these can be as simple or complex as you need them to be. And they're really just meant to be like a helpful thing or a conversation starter or a way to group like a lot of bugs. So I'll talk through how this one works, but I want to just point out that it's not super scientific, and it's not the only way to do it. So the steps with this method would be to determine the severity, how bad a bug is, the reach, how common it is on the website, and secondary benefits of fixing that issue. So besides accessibility, are you getting other benefits from fixing that bug? So we have a numerical rating system for each of those areas. And then you can add those numbers up to give a rating to each ticket, and then prioritize bugs based on that rating, along with other considerations. So we have the numerical ratings. So severity, we can call this like it's impossible to do a task, or maybe it's related to WCAG level A. And those aren't necessarily the same thing, but it's just a couple ways that you can decide that something is the worst severity, and that would have a numerical rating of 7. So then difficult or issues with WCAG AA would be 4. Things that are awkward or related to WCAG AAA would have a rating of 1. If something's not a best practice, you might rate it a 0 for this category. And then for reach, if it's on every single page, so say it's in the header, the footer, something global element, you might rate it a 4. If it's high traffic pages, but not all pages, might be 2. And if it's just a couple low traffic pages, it might be a 0. And then under secondary benefits, so maybe this affects everyone, and you might rate that a 2. Maybe it affects multiple groups, it's rated at a 1, or it's really one specific group, it might be rated as a 0. And that's really subjective. And so examples of how this might play out. So maybe your bug is the main menu is not keyboard accessible. So that's a severity of 7. It's impossible to use with a keyboard. The reach is rated 4 because it's on every single page of the website. And secondary benefits has a 2 because it affects everybody, whether or not you're using assistive technology. Keyboards are standard input device, so that rating might be 13. You might have an image that's missing alt text. So again, severity is 7. It's impossible to get that content. Reach might be 0 because it's really only on, like in this scenario, it might be on a very low traffic page. That's just one page on the site. And secondary benefits, I have here as 0, although I think that's debatable. So that overall rating would be 7. And I have a third example, heading level is skipped. So on this page, you go from H2 to H4 back to H2. So severity is 0 because this is a best practice. I think some of us feel very strongly about it, but it's not technically a failure. People can still access the content. The reach might be most pages, 2, rating of 2. And secondary benefits might be a rating of 1. So the rating for that one, I see a math problem with my slide, would be 3. So this is just one way to compare those 3 issues and say, okay, the main menu not being keyboard accessible is the most severe issue here. It has the most reach and secondary benefits to fixing it. That's what I'm going to invest in before I worry about the skipped heading levels. But prioritization can be based on other things as well. So your development workflow. So do you have separate developers for front end and back end? Do you want to group things by who has time? Maybe your front end developer wants to change global styles before component styles. So there might be an order that makes the most sense just with the development workflow. Also, there might be a accessibility gain per time spent. So you have that overall rating, but how much time is it going to take to address that? You might have something that's pretty important, but it's also going to take a lot of time. And you might have things that are medium, but will be very quick and can be grouped together. 10 of them done with the same code change. So that might change what your priorities are. You might tackle low-hanging fruit, or to put it a different way, those things that are easier to address, quicker to address, to get kind of the more accessibility improvements quicker, and then tackle those more difficult things next. So just some things to think about when prioritizing, especially if you have a lot of issues. If you have fewer or your context is different, you might have different items, and you might want to create a rating system that's more unique to you. Like that other webinar or slides I was looking at had things to do about, they had multiple products and they had prioritization based on which product it was or which audience it affected. So those are other things that might play into your prioritization decisions. So those were some monitoring and audit strategies, as well as kind of that bonus methods for prioritization of addressing issues. Next, we'll talk about some other long-term considerations. So going back to that theme of it's not over, there's no done, there's no end. Accessibility guidelines change, technology changes, browsers change, assistive technology changes, and we need to be prepared for what we're doing now not being enough, not being the right thing, not being the standard thing for later. Also, organizations change, the work changes, work context changes, who's there. So capacity and processes need to change too. And those are long-term considerations. That's my entire presentation. So we'll have a little extra time, I think, for Q&A. But yeah. I hope that's helpful, and I'm excited to answer some questions.
Jeanette, thank you so much. It is helpful, especially for state and local government employees here thinking about the new ADA rule, but we'll get into that. I want to go ahead and start with some audience questions. How do you get buy-in for the annual review? I've always had support for building accessibly, but the mentality seems to be that since it was made properly in the first place, that's good enough for 2 to 3 years.
Oh, 2 or 3 years. Yeah. So that's part of why my recommendation is to start that conversation early. If you're contracting or you're getting approval for the project to design and build the site, it being part of that conversation is, I think, an easier sell than, oh, we just finished this project, we spent all this money, now can we have more? So having it up front as part of the original project, just knowing and acknowledging that there will be that maintenance is part of it. Another way to approach it is, and I hope this is not a hard sell, is websites require maintenance. If nothing else, security maintenance, right? So this is just like that. So doing accessibility audits is like doing a security audit, right? These are all requirements that websites need to act under. Your website needs to be usable to people. Do you do analytics, right? This is in that world of website maintenance. So those are a couple ideas. I mean, it's really specific based on your organization, what's gonna work. But those are kind of some brainstorm ideas on the top of my head.
I think it's helpful, right, to frame it as maintenance. It's required maintenance. And you'll be maintaining anyways. And here's where else we can slip that in. That makes a lot of sense. Uh, two like similar questions. If there's an annual review, do you also recommend annual refresh training for content creators or anyone else involved with the site? The second question is, for like new employees, how are they most effectively taught digital accessibility practices, like during an onboarding, once required training or something else?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I'm still figuring out. I know there's been a lot of activity in the chat, so curious to see what people say about that. But yeah, I think annual trainings, again, if we use that idea that it's just like other aspects, like when I work under federal government contracts, I have cybersecurity training. That's an annual requirement. It's a refresher. So I think the exact frequency depends maybe on your role or on your context, but I think an annual refresh is good for a lot of different things, including accessibility. But I don't know if that's the only thing. I think it's also helpful to have supports for that throughout. So like have a Slack channel or a Teams chat where people can go and ask questions, have a community or a work group, to maybe ties things to the audit. Maybe if you have your annual audit and you get that approved, you get those findings back. Maybe that's a good time to share the findings, talk through how we can avoid issues in the future or what we might want to brush up on more specifically.
That's excellent. It's super helpful. To that end, are there workflows or knowledge sharing processes that you've observed that are most effective in keeping either staff trained or digital content in compliance for a low resource company? Like, and what was it that made them effective?
So I'm gonna be just very upfront. I put together this presentation because it's a problem. It's not something I've seen a lot of good examples of, or maybe those good examples don't need me in my company to help them, right? So they're maybe in their own happy bubble, and and it's not something I've seen, but I don't have a lot of examples because it's a hard thing. People are struggling with it, and we're all kind of in that together of trying to figure out what will work, and what works for one organization won't necessarily work for another. So I'm sorry to say I don't have an answer to that one.
What I'm getting from you though is that what would be effective would be a multi-pronged approach. So it's like it's high
Mm-hmm.
level buy-in, it's your own knowledge and dedication to it. And you had mentioned earlier um, to have someone appointed for accessibility governance. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe if it's not you, then it's someone else in partnership with you or otherwise doing what you could either to get resources or find resources that are free and accessible or already
Yeah.
at your company that can be used that way. Is that something you've maybe observed?
Yeah, I think that's a great summary. That would certainly be the approach that I would recommend. And, based on the learnings, webinars, and trainings that I've looked at, try all those things. Have that Slack channel, that work group that doesn't really take a lot of resources. Just have a way for people to talk to each other, and I would, I think, call out that IAAP, who I mentioned, has certifications. That's the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. There is a cost for their membership. You can get either individual or you can get small organization, but they have an excellent discussion board. So that's also a way to get access to trainings. There are a lot of free webinars like WordPress Accessibility Day, and others that you can access. And then those discussions boards have an active community that's just kind of beautiful to watch, and you can ask questions and get really great answers.
I like what you said there about finding essentially affinity groups or groups within the same work as you to find what they're doing for accessibility successfully in their realm. So like if you are managing a startup for a WooCommerce site, that you would see what other WooCommerce startups are doing to keep their sites accessible. And there's a lot on the internet and a lot to look up, that there might be something out there where someone has this answer for you. Or the training already worked out. There's no reason to, as we say, reinvent the wheel.
Mhm.
Something's already there. I like that perspective. Let's see, we have some more questions here. Uh, in the same realm, any thanks so much for your excellent presentation today. Any tips for having clients really hear us, developers and designers, about the importance of hierarchy and clear, concise messaging? I agree with the example you used. If everything is special, nothing is special, but sometimes client just won't hear it.
Yes, that is true. That is my experience. My approach to this is it's a marathon, not a sprint. So they might not hear it that first time. They might not hear it that first 5 times, but especially if you have a relationship with them, it's not just a design and build, it's also support or long-term maintenance. It just keep bringing it up. It's always an issue. And maybe you'll over time convince them or brainwash them into understanding this. The other thing is pointing to references. So Nielsen Norman Group is something that a lot of people respect. Maybe your client doesn't know them. Maybe your client is government and would appreciate resources from a government agency. So then there's plainlanguage.gov, there's UK guidelines. So you can point to what your client will respect. And that can be really helpful, I think, in trying to convince them is pointing to, look, these are the guidelines, these are the best practices, here's the data. Some people really respond to data, or some people respond to the more like usability, human-centered reason. So going through in more detail, why should we have good structured data? What does that really mean for people? How do people consume data? So some of those things can help depending on who it is you're trying to convince.
I like what you say about using data and maybe a human-centered like frame to sell this point. I think I attended a webinar a few months ago where someone mentioned used the phrase people you are choosing to exclude. And I think that if you take
Mm,
that over, isn't that awesome? I think
yeah,
if someone can bring that to your client and be like, well, based on this data, these are the people you are choosing to exclude, but maybe say it a little nicer than I just delivered. But
I don't
or
know.
you know your
Maybe it
client.
needs to be that. Maybe you work up to that. Maybe
Work
you
up to
get to
that.
that point.
Right. And ultimately,
That's
I think
strong.
as designers and developers, you are the expert in how this information is conveyed. And I think that doesn't necessarily mean the client doesn't know that when they hire you, but maybe could use a reminder that you know what you're talking about.
Yeah, there's some interesting dynamics there too of sometimes we get hired even though the internal staff know perfectly what we're saying, but leadership needs to hear it from another voice. Maybe if I get hired and I'm saying it, maybe I'm not the voice they need to hear it from. Maybe they need it internal or maybe they need it from an external voice. So that it's interesting how that can play out dynamically too.
Yeah, yeah. A couple questions about accessibility governance. What type of governance documents do you suggest?
So I have mixed feelings about this. I, as a student of Agile, people and processes over documents kind of idea, I don't think that it's helpful to perfectly craft a written document and have it on a shelf where nobody reads it, right? But going through the process of creating that written document might be what solidifies things. Having supports around updating that document annually or whatever the time frame is, that refresher on, okay, what is it? Are we doing this? Does this need to change? Those are, I think, the parts that are so important. So the creation of it, the thinking through it, the making a decision, and getting that in writing forces a real decision to happen. So having a workshop, talking through things, but not putting it in writing, not documenting it, can lead to people not quite making that firm decision. When you have to fill out that box that says, who is it? You might be like, oh, we have someone. But who is it? When you have to write it down, that forces you to make that decision. So I think part of the question was about like what format. It can be any kind of format, and it can be, I think, really simple. So no more than what you need, but I think it is important to go through the process of deciding to write it down and then to look at it later, to have someone actually look at it, and not just have it be, okay, that happened. Now we're going to go back to our old habits, right? Same thing with the content maintenance that I started with. People will slip into habits. So how are you supporting any kind of change you need to make? You have to actively support that.
That makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense, and there's a lot of context in what your audience is that you are, and what audience you're governing, right? What support do you have? Our next couple of questions kind of bring us back a bit to high level buy-in. So one question asks if you can make graphics with text accessible or not use them at all, and another one asks, do you feel it's reasonably possible to make an entire site 100% WCAG 2.1 or 2.2 conformant? Now, I know that there are different ways to make images accessible, and if there's a static website has the most chance of being 100% compliant, but then we're also looking at browsers and updated assistive tech. But really, I think it asks, if you're asking for high level buy-in, if you're asking for resources, how do you sell that? How do you sell the project that's never finished, or how do you sell a change in design work that's already been done?
So some great questions or conversation starters. Going back to the first part, around images and text. So the guidelines are avoid images of text. I don't know of many examples where you would want it. So I think there's usually a better solution, but it is permissible in certain situations. So that's really a content thing, based on your content needs, your goals, your audiences. But typically you can do it another way than an image of text. Can a site be completely conformant? Can one? Yes. Can your site? Maybe not. 100% is very difficult. And again, we had talked about level A, level AA, level AAA. Very unlikely that a site will be AAA, fully conformant. AA is what most people are going for. That requires the content, the design, that content maintenance to be on point. Because anytime you add content or make a change, you might be, even if you are 100%, you might be changing that. So it's very difficult, I'll say. And how I've talked about this with people is there's no website that is bug-free, because that doesn't make sense. You can't, like, no one has enough money to fix every bug always, and it's always changing. So that includes accessibility bugs, that includes usability bugs. So that's why prioritization is important. That's why it's important to look at real usability and have those real usability tests and audits with different kinds of people to make sure that your site is usable. That doesn't mean it's going to be 100% bug-free or perfect. Also, the guidelines have wiggle room in them. There's different interpretations, and different people, different auditors have different opinions on what is a pass and a fail. So that makes it extremely difficult to say that something is going to 100% pass. I missed some of the presentations that talked about this, but I'm very curious to see how this plays out with the US ADA Title II DOJ, because those are strong requirements, and I think they're very hard to meet 100%. 90%, cool, but 100%, very difficult.
There is room for liability. Absolutely, there is. We are almost out of time. I want to ask you one quick question. Do you recommend do you have any go-to tools you like to use for time-intensive tasks like building an inventory or auditing? Like, what are your go-to tools?
Screaming Frog. That's so Screaming Frog is the tool I've had most experience with, or the one that my company typically uses to do a crawl, come up with an inventory. They have some different, that is a paid tool. That's, I think, maybe the only one I know. So curious if other people have other ones, but that's my answer.
We'll check the chat and see what folks have. And I believe Amber is here to close us out. Thank you so much, Jeanette.
Thanks.
Hello, everyone. I'm Amber Hines, one of the lead organizers and a board member for WP Accessibility Day. On behalf of the entire organizing team, I want to thank you for participating in WordPress Accessibility Day 2024. This was our fourth WordPress Accessibility Day event and the largest that we have had in terms of attendees and the organizing team, which is super exciting for us. So this year, we had 2,448 registrants from 79 countries. That's 300 more attendees and 9 more countries than we had last year. So behind the scenes, there were 26 organizers and 22 volunteers supporting 30 different speakers. Through funds raised during the event, we were able to donate $2,800 to Knowbility, our fiscal sponsor, and a nonprofit that is focused on website accessibility and education. Without our sponsors, this event wouldn't be possible. Their support enables us to hire professional captioners and the American Sign Language interpreters that we have all been enjoying watching throughout the event. We also are able to pay our speakers and cover the cost required to ensure that the event is able to succeed and operate on a year-round basis. So thank you to those sponsors. Our platinum sponsors, 20i, Equalize Digital, and WP Engine. Our gold sponsors, GoDaddy, Grackle Docs, Gravity Forms, Green Geeks, TPGI, and Yoast. And silver sponsors, Ally Collective, Code Geek, Drake Cooper, Elementor, Overnight Website, Pressable, and Second Melody. And we had 11 bronze sponsors, as well as micro sponsors and individual donors who were all critical and to making a difference in ensuring that our ability to continue running this event in future years. This year, we had 32 micro sponsors and 101 people who donated to support the event. To each and every one of you, thank you so much for your support. Volunteers have generously given their time throughout the event to MC sessions, handle the chat and Q&A, and to keep the stream running throughout the conference. We very much appreciate all of you volunteers who have helped to make the event happen, but I especially want to call out a few people on the organizing team who stepped up in a big way. In previous years, One of my other co-lead organizers, Joe Dolson, and I have gotten about 2 hours of sleep during the conference. Last night, I got about 6 hours of sleep, in no small part to our new APAC team leads, Ricky Blacker and Ricky Onsman, and organizers Adrian Grace and Isla Waite, who very gracefully handled many challenges at a moment's notice in the middle of the night for us. So I'd like to give them a round of applause, and all of our volunteers a heartfelt thank you for how much that they put into the event, both before and over the last 24 hours. And of course, thank you to all of our speakers worldwide who shared their knowledge. Every WordPress Accessibility Day, I learned something new. Your dedication to teaching others about accessibility is an essential contribution to building a better web for all users. A few housekeeping items before we leave you eagerly, I hope, awaiting WordPress Accessibility Day 2025. First, we want to hear your feedback. We'll use your feedback to help improve WP Accessibility Day in future years. You can anonymously submit feedback about the whole event or any individual session on our feedback page. Feedback will be accepted through Friday, October 11th at 4:59 UTC, which is midnight on Friday for me in US Central Time. If you submit feedback, you can also enter to win a WordPress Accessibility Day t-shirt. So please go get started. Every feedback entry counts as an additional entry to win t-shirts. We appreciate every piece of feedback you send in. Sponsor swag and giveaways are still open, and new entries will be accepted until midnight, US Central Time today, so towards the end of the day. Sponsor pages have great discounts and free goodies for attendees, so log in to our website at 2024.wpaccessibility.day and please check out what they're offering. If you want to keep learning throughout the year, you can attend the free WordPress accessibility meetups that are held twice a month via Zoom with live captioning. Meetups are held on the first Thursday at 1500 UTC and the third Monday at 0 UTC every month. You can find the group on meetup.com if you search WordPress Accessibility Meetup, and we can probably throw a link in the chat here in just a few minutes. If you've enjoyed this year's event, please consider getting involved. There are 2 ways that you can help. First, our translation team, led by Joni Halabi, is actively translating video transcripts into different languages. We are specifically looking for people who can translate videos into Spanish or French, but we would, of course, love translations into other languages. There are both paid, I'll say that again, paid and volunteer translation opportunities. Please learn more about translating videos and apply to translate at wpaccessibility.day/translate. Second, if you want to help organize WordPress Accessibility Day next year, please fill out our organizer interest form. You can find the form at the bottom of the organizer's page on the event website. Organizing is incredibly rewarding, and we would love to have you on the team in 2025. Thank you again to everyone for joining us for WordPress Accessibility Day. It's been a wonderful 24 hours. I hope you've learned something exciting and new. Watch your email for a notification when the recorded videos are available in a few weeks, and keep on working towards building a more accessible web.
Thank you to WordPress Accessibility Day 2024 sponsors. Platinum sponsor 20i. Easily build, deploy, and manage all your projects with 20i managed WordPress hosting. One UI for all your servers, apps, sites, databases, security, DNS, and email. Perfect for agencies, e-commerce, developers, multi-site hosting, and high-traffic sites. Platinum sponsor Equalize Digital. Since all they do is accessibility, every post on their blog is an accessibility resource. You can find webinar recordings, articles, and additional resources at equalizedigital.com/resources. Platinum sponsor WP Engine. WP Engine provides the most relied upon and trusted WordPress products for businesses, brands, and agencies of all sizes. Thanks to our gold sponsors, GoDaddy, Grackle Docs, Gravity Forms, Green Geeks, TPGI, and Yoast. And thank you to our silver sponsors, CodeGeek, Drake Cooper, Elementor, Overnight Website, Pressable, Second Melody, and Accessibility Collective.